Okay, and looks like we are rolling, just waiting to make sure it goes through on YouTube. There we go. Okay. All right, and welcome to this rare live stream on the Liberty Under Attack channel. We're extremely glad you've decided to tune into this live debate. I'm hearing myself on YouTube. That's not good. All right, so my name is Shane Radliff, and I will be the moderator this evening. So first off, the live stream chat is open. Please submit any questions you have for Adam and or Graham. We have dedicated specific time for your submission, so please make sure to utilize that chat and get those in. And we are just getting started. Share this link across social media, your email list if you still do that sort of thing like me, so we can get more folks to tune in live. The experience is always better live, and you can interact with obviously the listeners and our debaters here. So the only three rules this evening are: 1, no interrupting; 2, no ad hominem attacks; and 3, stick to subject matter and the agreed upon debate format and time allocations. I highly doubt we'll have any problems with these, but they have been agreed upon by both Adam and Graham. So therefore, if there are any violations of these, I will provide the contract enforcement, since we're voluntarist anarcho-capitalists, by stepping in as needed. So the format for this debate is opening statements, rebuttals to opening statements, questions for each other, for each debater, audience questions, another round of questions, and closing statements. And we'll try to keep this around an hour. So the resolution for this evening is as follows: the American electoral process is a legitimate and pragmatic means, in view of the voluntarist property ethic, by which to assume custody of lands and resources, lessen the negative impact of government, and make it easier to achieve a voluntary society. Adam will be arguing in the affirmative, and Graham will be arguing in the negative. So debaters, do you have any questions or concerns before we move forward?
All good to go here. Okay, I think you cut out a little bit there, Shane. On the resolution.
Okay, that's not good. I'll reread it. That's not a problem.
Yeah, maybe it might be a good idea.
Okay, yeah, not a problem. So the resolution is: the American electoral process is a legitimate and pragmatic means, in view of the voluntarist property ethic, by which to assume custody of lands and resources, lessen the negative impact of government, and make it easier to achieve a voluntary society. I guess for those who may not know who you are, why don't you each introduce yourself real quick and tell the listeners who you are and what you do.
Sure. I'm Graham Smith. I live here in Japan. I run the YouTube channel Voluntary Japan. I used to do a live show and interview people. I don't really do that anymore. Now my main thing is over on steemit.com. I'm known as @KafkaAnarchy84. I like the blog there, and yeah, I'm into voluntarist, anarchist stuff, working on building local networks here in Japan, farmers, cryptocurrency markets, and things of that nature. And extremely interested in voluntarism, which is why I wanted to do the debate. And I always respect anyone who steps up to debate, so I'm appreciative of Adam taking the time to do this. So looking forward to it.
Thanks, Graham. Hey, and my pleasure. And thank you for being the initiator of this and setting it up. And while I haven't appreciated everything you've said on Steam, I definitely appreciate that you're willing to throw down and that you're a vibrant voice in the conversation, that you're obviously passionate about what you believe in. And that's really what's motivated me from when I was a kid. And my dad told me stories about punking teachers in school. And my mom had me listening to oldies and telling about how silly it was coming from Canada to be a U.S. citizen. And when I was in high school, back when I was in middle school, actually, I got in trouble for trying to blow up the boys' bathroom. And that was my first major brush with authority as a punk kid. But then in high school, despite being so inherently anti-authoritarian, the propaganda of statism overcame my better sensibility. And I ended up enlisting in the United States Marine Corps as a reservist, planned to do that while going to college and become an officer afterwards. While I was a reservist in college in Southern California, Claremont McKenna, majoring in psychology and government, I volunteered to go to Iraq, and I was in Fallujah in 2004 for 7 months with the Marine Corps Civil Affairs team, earned a Combat Action Ribbon, Navy Commendation Medal. And I'm not that, I don't claim to be particularly open-minded or smart or flexible or anything like that. It took me 10 years before understanding what libertarianism meant from when I first identified as a libertarian. And to me, libertarian, anarcho-capitalist, voluntarist, those are all roughly synonymous terms. And it was part of my awakening process that I had to be disgruntled when I left the military. I got in trouble for bringing a pistol back. And so when I got out, I was just pissed off enough to join Iraq Veterans Against the War, fell into full-time activism there, became a national figure when the Marine Corps came after me for protesting in uniform over a street theater issue. And then I was a congressional candidate, Republican, endorsed by Ron Paul in 2010 in New Mexico, my home state, and realized that the Republican Party strategy was definitely a losing one for libertarians. And since then have been committed to being involved with the Libertarian Party. And I had a radio show, Adam versus the Man, and right before that got canceled, it got picked up as a television show. So I was on RT America for 4 months in DC. And when that got canceled because I was being critical of Putin and the Russian government, I went independent online, built my YouTube channel up to 70 million views. But then I went to jail for civil disobedience for racking a shotgun 2 blocks from the White House for a YouTube video. And while I was in jail, started writing the ultimate libertarian red pill. And I say that with all humility because I had a lot of help writing this book now in its 3rd printing, over 3 million downloads. And I've since now, like Graham, shifted my focus to Steam It. And I am running for president in 2020 on the platform of dissolving the entire federal government in a peaceful, orderly, responsible manner. And that really, I believe, is the original impetus for Graham's challenge of me and for this debate. And before I get into that, I will cut my introduction and let Graham take his first swing at that.
Okay. So is this opening statements then?
Yep, we'll get on to to opening statements here. So yeah, let's get to it. 7-minute opening statements, and the traditional format, the person arguing in the affirmative would go first. So Adam, you would be the one to start with your opening statement. You have 7 minutes, sir.
Well, I'm happy to go either way if Graham wants to go first.
Up to you guys. No?
All right. Well, in this campaign, I am running not to be president. And frankly, I don't think there's anything more anti-freedom and unlibertarian you can say besides, I want to be president of the United States. I want to have this illegitimate authority. I want to run an illegitimate institution that is unethical and is holding back humanity. No, I think that would be entirely in contradiction of voluntarist property ethics and just good common decency in every way possible. That being said, understanding government, what it relies on today is a public consensus. Every government today, at least, and even in prior times when government was blatantly coercive and it was just, well, I'm the king, so I'm in charge, screw you. They all require a certain consent of the governed. And in the day and age that we're living in, that consent comes through the electoral process. And if we get this consensus in the American public, and I think we can do this before we come to any point of collapse, that we can withdraw the consent from the federal government existing entirely. And from traveling the country, I'm actually sitting right now in No Force One, the Freedom Bus, and we're doing the convention tour of libertarian state conventions to engineer the libertarian takeover of the Libertarian Party. But what we found is that people are really ready for this. They're ready to put down the guns of government when we can show them a viable alternative. And I think it's really important as voluntarists that we come up with practical policy as opposed to just the utopian ideal. Now, a lot of us have disagreements about how we get there. I think they're all important. I think every way we can attack the state is essential to moving humanity forward. We should not allow any avenue of attack to not be pursued, if not at least explored. What I found from this is that when we tell the American people, look, we can do better without the federal government. We can take it down to the state level. We can take it down eventually to the county level. And really, as libertarians, we get government down to the county level, we're done. It might not be voluntary immediately at that point, but when government is that localized, we are pretty close to the Hoppian ideal of private property enclaves, where you can set the policy, you can secede, you can start your own, you can separate from that, so on and so forth. And government will essentially be voluntary by then because the market will be so developed that all the ways in which it exerts any kind of coercive control will simply be inviable. And this is, again, why we see technology being such an important driver of this. A big part of my campaign is promoting use of cryptocurrency, getting people to say, I don't want the government to have the money monopoly anymore. So this was one of the important things that we discussed in developing the resolution for this. And I want to thank Graham for being so direct and open about it and being able to negotiate what the resolution would be to make sure that it accurately reflected the premise of my campaign. So when you are able to develop a consensus in the American public through the voting process that says, no, this government is illegitimate, we will not support its existence any longer, it will no longer be allowed to exist one way or another. And what I'm doing, the reason that we said custody, and it was originally authority and control, and I clarified this with Graham by email. I'm willing to say authority and control if what you mean is equally applicable to if you see a mugger mugging somebody on the street and you yell or you point a gun at him and say, hey, stop, put that wallet down. He drops the wallet. You pick up the wallet and you give it back to its rightful owner. That qualifies as custody and control. So with my platform, what I'm doing is committing with this executive order that I would be signing, which would be the only thing that I would do as president, to dissolve the federal government. I resign from the presidency, declare the federal government of no authority, but essentially that's unnecessary because it's already been done by the American people through the electoral process. And then I am taking custodial control and authority, if you want to call it that, although it's incredibly insignificant in terms of the actual power that I'm asking for in this. If the power of the presidency is this, the power to dissolve the federal government in a peaceful, orderly manner that will be laid out in advance in this executive order is really down here. And the authority that I'm asking for as the overseer of this process would only be to replace heads of departments as they're carrying out this process, if they resign, if they die, if they're incapable, if they're not following instructions. So the authority that I be taking on is insignificant in comparison to what you think of as the authority of the presidency. So what I'm doing is going in, like I said, as a bankruptcy agent. This is a legitimate free market function to campaign and to say, hey, we shouldn't have a federal government. We shouldn't have any government at all. We shouldn't have any coercive institutions whatsoever. And this becomes kind of a silly semantic thing about anarchy versus minarchy. And of course, anybody who's an anarchist is okay with voluntary government, although we might squabble about the definition and say, oh, well, it's not government if it's voluntary, but we're not going to put a gun in somebody's head and say, oh, you can't call your homeowners association a government because that's our word. No, if you want to have voluntary local government, that's fine. That's still within the lines of voluntarism, of anarchy, if you want to use that word to describe it. So I think it's really essential, actually. It's not just that it's legitimate. It's essential that we confront the state in every way possible, but most essentially that we confront it at its heart, which is the consent of the public, that we work to remove that consent, and that when that consent is removed, we provide the means for a peaceful, orderly transition to a voluntary society. We can do this in a way that doesn't pull the rug out from underneath anybody. We can do this in a way that immediately improves everybody's lives. And really, that's what this is supposed to be about. It's one thing to sit in a corner and say, well, I'm right about everything and you're all wrong. But if you don't ever do anything about it, what's the point? I'm an activist because I'm motivated by a deep-seated sense of injustice. I see the suffering in the world. I see the pain, and I've seen it firsthand in combat. I've seen it in 20 veterans committing suicide a day. I've had friends who have died. When I went to the VA and they tried to throw pills at me and I didn't take them just because I was having trouble sleeping, I said, screw this. I'm gonna pursue non-governmental means of addressing these issues. And that's, to me, what this is essentially, to say, no, we are going to withdraw our consent. We are going to work our way out of this. We are going to bring people together. We are going to wake more people up than ever before, because we want to make the world a better place. We want to make the world a better place for people, because we care about people, because we love people. And bringing people together around the message of freedom is what it's going to take to bring about a voluntary society.
Oh, and right on time too. Well done. So Graham, your opening statement, sir. You have 7 minutes.
Okay, so just to cut right to the chase, as per the resolution, Adam's plan is not compatible with voluntarism. And the reason is, the voluntarist philosophy makes the simple, unique, and irrefutable claim that each human being is a self-owner. You own yourself, you're nobody's slave, and nobody is your slave. So I think we can all agree on that. The concept of individual self-ownership is the foundation upon which all of voluntarism and libertarianism rest. Remove or compromise this foundational principle and the philosophy crumbles into utter meaninglessness. Individual self-ownership is not some high utopian, like pie in the sky ideal, like Adam in his opening statement used the word utopia. It's an objective, immutable, natural reality attested to by science, economics, history, and life and nature itself. Even when I'm right here talking to you guys, I am the one talking. No one can talk for me more directly than I can. The signal comes from my brain to my muscles. When I was a kid, my cousin used to pin me on the floor and like grab my arm and make me punch myself, right? And he'd say, stop punching yourself. We all understand that that's not me doing the action. So this is a testament to individual self-ownership, nature itself, reality itself. Now, where do we get the idea of property from that? Well, if I go out into the woods with this body and self I own and pick an apple from a tree, I've appropriated the apple. It's proper to me. It's literally my property. We all know if someone comes along and punches me and takes the apple, that it's stealing. There's a limited 0.002% of the population that might have brain damage or some other condition where they wouldn't understand this. Pretty much everyone understands it's not just. So I can take an unowned apple and make it mine. I can build a cabin because I'm using my body, which I own, and making a first connection, a first claim to the resource. So we need property norms because resources are scarce and people's wants and needs and otherwise are virtually unlimited and unpredictable comes in, and we need property norms to minimize violent conflict. So to get to the point after laying all this foundation, according to the voluntarist property ethic, there are really only three ways by which you can legitimately acquire property. The first is first use or initial possession, like when I took the apple from the tree. The second is through trade, business, commerce, etc. And the third is through inheritance or a gift from a legitimate previous owner. So this brings me finally to my problem with Adam's platform, which is that legitimate ownership of land and resources and authority over people cannot be acquired via political mandate or via US majority electoral processes. The reason being, there's no connection to individual self-ownership there and libertarian property ethic. And I'd like to read you guys a quote from Stefan Kinsella over there at Mises.org. He has an article called Libertarianism, but bear with me. Thus, the libertarian position on property rights is that in order to permit conflict-free, productive use of scarce resources, property titles to particular resources are assigned to particular owners. However, the title assignment must not be random, arbitrary, or particularistic. Instead, it has to be assigned based on the existence of an objective, intersubjectively ascertainable link between owner and resource claimed. And Adam has no objective, intersubjective link to these tens of thousands of acres of land and resources. And we'll get to the metaphor about the mugger and the wallet later. But you can't just willy-nilly claim these things, and there's reason for this. And one of those reasons is not everyone will consent to the plan. Some people may have other ideas about how they want to peacefully get their stolen resources back. And if they don't abide by Adam's plan, is that plan going to be forced? Not going to be forced. And what's the point of the plan in the first place? Anyways, it doesn't matter if Adam's intentions are good. The principle stands for a good reason. What is good for one man may not be desirable for another. That's just the subjective theory of value. The principles of property, self-ownership, and the free market remain the fairest of all arbiters. And I'd like to quote Adam himself here. And I quote, "The entire concept of voting for someone to rule you, to control you, of imposing your choice of a leader on someone else is unethical." And that's from the No More Two-Party System video he made for them. So imposing your choice of a leader on someone else is unethical. I agree. And, you know, Adam has said America needs a leader. And maybe not everyone wants to agree with this plan. The second illegitimate consequence of this illegitimate assumption of control and power or custody, which custody, by the way, always entails control by definition, is national. I'm going to ask him about more, and I will, but he plans to allocate the national parks to independent nonprofits and keep them open to the public. I quote, "If so, individuals will not be able to homestead freely and in an unlimited manner without asking for permission." Okay, so this is prohibiting their exercise of individual self-ownership. And I know I'm going fast here. I'm trying to get this all in. So that's why the plan is not ethical and not legitimate according to libertarianism, voluntary property ethic. The plan is also not pragmatic, and the reason is, in a nutshell, trying to change the world's largest crime syndicate from the inside by being a vocal opponent of the syndicate and assuming a high seat of power, assuming that they're going to let you voluntarily, by their own mechanisms, destroy themselves, is just it just seems totally stupid to me. I don't know how anyone could arrive at that being a pragmatic idea. I said, well, do you have a better idea? Well, first, you have valid criticism. I don't have to talk about how to pick the cotton to criticize slavery, but yes, I do. My idea is voluntarism in the free market. Polycentric bottom-up change is how change really happens, and innovation. And Adam mentioned that we're not doing anything. Well, what's happening now on Steemit and in my community here, farming, feeding the hungry, sheltering the homeless, assisting flood victims, aid being sent to people in Venezuela suffering under socialism, anarchist networks, markets, 3D printing of guns for self-defense and houses, tireless spreading of the pure voluntarism, the real philosophy, people's doctor bills being paid, etc. What's happening via Adam's plan in politics right now? Donations to statist political parties and watering down the powerful message of real freedom, of self-ownership. 43% of people didn't vote in the last election. I don't think we should try to get people back into politics now. Politics won't save you, and I think you have a better chance with your neighbor and technology. Okay, thank you. That was a mouthful.
All right, very good, very good. So next is rebuttals to opening statements. So Adam, if you want to, start rebutting what Graham said, you have 3 minutes.
Well, I'll start by pointing out that totally stupid is not an argument, and that this idea is change from the inside and assuming a position of power within the gang. Absolutely not. And I think that's a really bad misrepresentation of what I'm proposing. That should be obvious to anyone, that we are changing it from the outside. We are using the electoral process as a way to get people to withdraw their consent. This is not from inside the system. I'm not going inside the system and taking some position of authority within the system in order to bring about some change. No, the change happens in the paradigm. The change happens by changing how people think. And that's what this campaign is about. First and foremost, changing the paradigm of the American public to say, we don't need a big centralized government. We're not going to win getting everybody over to voluntarism precisely. And this is a big thing that libertarians have a hard time accepting, that, we're not going to be able to, that we can't convert everybody. Most human beings are creatures of pragmatism. And so I think the technological innovation is much more important than even the philosophical spreading of the message. They're both important. They both need to happen in tandem. But at the same time, we need to address the guns of government directly. So you didn't really get to the mugger metaphor, but I think that's the most important analogy to describe what we're doing. And that it's if the federal government is criminal, which it is, and we want them to stop being criminal, which we do, and if we get enough of the American people to yell at them at the same time and say, you can't do that anymore, and they drop the wallet on the street and they stop doing it, then we still get to pick up the wallet and do our best to return it to its rightful owner. Now, you're right to point out that this is not going to be a perfect redistribution of wealth where everybody who's stolen from is going to get exactly what was stolen. If you want to achieve a voluntary society, you want to achieve an ethical society in which everybody is more prosperous, you're going to have to put down the materialism for a little bit and just accept that so much has been stolen that it's going to be an improper redistribution no matter how it happens, even if there's a collapse. Now, what Graham raised is an issue of the national parks. What I have in mind for this, and this is a proposal, this is not something I'm committed to. I'm welcoming anybody, and I welcome Graham, I welcome your input on what you would do in this situation. If you had this authority, what you would do to handle the national parks in particular. But when I look at this from the voluntarist property ethic perspective, like take the Grand Canyon, for example. I'm glad that the Grand Canyon is a national park. I'm glad that it exists as a discrete resource with broad-based land-based public ownership, and there's a general consensus that the Grand Canyon shouldn't be parceled out into development. Now, it should be open to that if there's a big enough consensus that people want that. So what I have in mind for this,
Right,
and again,
and,
just the
that's
proposal.
time. So yeah,
That's time. All right, we'll come back to that.
Okay. All right. So Graham, you have 3 minutes for your rebuttal to Adam's opening statement.
Sure. Yeah. Well, first of all, the main point of my argument wasn't addressed, that it's by definition not a voluntarist plan, because that elections via the state don't grant legitimate authority. I thought it was funny how Adam said, we have to put aside the materialism, a nice little underhanded jab there, as if all people like me care about is materialism, when in fact, the whole reason I wanted to have this debate was because I care about the philosophy. Adams recently called people to actually put down the ideology, or at least make it secondary. And I think, the whole thing is based on the ideology. And the reason is because voluntarism is the only ethic, libertarianism is the only ethic that protects the smallest minority, which is the individual right to not have a plan they don't agree with forced on them. And illegitimate authority, it doesn't matter if your intentions are good or not. The best arbiter of these resources would be the free market, price calculation, accurate reading of market signals and supply and demand, which can't be done by a central planner, and economics has proved this. To address the metaphor of the wallet, it's different. If I find a guy's wallet or get it from a mugger, that's a one-on-one situation. I know I have an objective link to whose property it is, and I can give it back to him. Nobody is arguing that this process will ever be perfect, but it can't legitimately be done by one man and a central group of custodians, as Adam calls them, with illegitimate authority. There's people living around these lands that have a closer link, that maybe fish and hunt on them. And this is aside from the fact, like I've already gone past that gaining power through the election anyways is illegitimate. But the market's real change happens from bottom up always. And as far as, changing the system from the inside, it is attempting to change the system from the inside. Adam used the metaphor of the analogy to the founding fathers in the Revolutionary War. But these are totally different situations. They did not draft an executive order to King George and attempt to become the king in order to set America free. There is risk with liberty. And of course, nobody wants bloodshed or anything like this. But my point is, politics is not going to protect you. However, our communities and our neighbors and technology might protect you. And I just see it as a shame that we would be diving back into this political circus and this illegitimate way of doing things, with all the great materials out there, on Austrian economics, and showing us how things can be built organically from the smallest level up and not from the biggest level down.
Okay. All right.
So
I think we could just go back and forth for a few more 3-minute rounds if you're okay with that, Graham.
I'm fine with that. Yeah.
Sure. Okay.
I mean, we were going to try to do the question and answer back and forth, but we can insert that into this and just keep going back and forth. So I'll take another 3 minutes if that's all right then.
Yeah.
I'm
Go
cool with
for
that.
Okay. So, just to get back to the national parks, I'll just finish my point there quickly, which is that what I would want to see is that there is a way for the market to provide a way of preserving large natural resources for that greater value, that not everything has to be parceled out to the individual in order for the individual to have a legitimate stake in it. So one of the ideas that I would suggest for what to do with national park land is to give everybody essentially a homestead right to that, to claim an individual share. So one way that could happen is that you set up an office at the front of a national park and say, anybody who shows up in the next 6 months and gives us a thumbprint and their name and says, I want to claim a part of the Grand Canyon private authority, whatever we call it, and then it is actually open to the public. It is open to public ownership. It is open essentially to a homestead property claim. Now, as for the bigger parts of government land, because the national parks are really a small part of that, I'm surprised that was what you homed in on here, Graham. But I got to say, first of all, you are already doing a much better job than Larkin Rose of really homing in on the heart of this philosophically. So I hand it to you for that, because you are really challenging me to get down to what is the ethical premise of this. And I still think it comes down to the wallet analogy, that the change happens from the outside. We are turning the American presidential election into a referendum on whether or not the federal government should be allowed to exist at all. The executive order by which this will be achieved is going to be available online months before the election. In fact, I will have it on my website before the Libertarian National Convention in 2020, which would be the first point at which I'm seriously asking anybody to vote for this platform. And when the American people go to vote, they will know exactly what they are voting for. And it's not for someone to be president. It's not for someone to have, that illegitimate authority over others. It is for someone to pick up the wallet. When the wallet has been dropped, when they say, let's put down the guns of the federal government once and for all, it will no longer be viable. You will not be able to hire an enforcement class. You will not be able to have the public consent for the existence of the federal government at all. Here's what I'm going to do to pick up the wallet and do the best that we possibly can to repay the American people, the true creditors of the federal government. And it's not a perfect plan. It's not going to be perfect. So I appreciate your dig on me saying, hey, it's not, don't be so materialistic, but it's more like, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good here. And I'll tell you how bad this plan is. It's still going to leave us with 50 state governments, 5 territorial governments. We're going to have 50 independent states, 5 autonomous territories, and up to 562 sovereign native nations. This isn't the end of statism.
Okay, I just wanted to jump in. We don't have any questions in chat, so we can just continue with this format because that portion isn't here yet. If we get a question in chat, I'll definitely bring it up. But at this point, we don't have any. So 3 minutes for you, Graham, and we'll just continue this back and forth.
Okay, sure. So again, I just want to reinforce legitimate authority and ownership or custody or control, whatever you call it, cannot be granted by a U.S. Presidential election.
It's not.
It's as simple as that. It's as simple as that. And I have another quote from Adam here. This was from Rice Crypto on YouTube, the channel Rice Crypto. That's RICE. One-on-one with Adam Kokesh, Adam says, I quote, "Maybe I wouldn't swear in it all. Maybe I'd just walk up to the inauguration, and say, no, I decline to take the oath of office, and instead hereby, by the power invested in me by the American people through the American electoral process, declare the federal government to be of no authority, and I hereby instead declare myself to be custodian of the federal government." Okay, this is not something this is something diametrically opposed to voluntarist principle. So it's my thing is, as per the resolution, this is not a legitimate plan according to voluntarism. And I would be happy if Adam would stop using the label of voluntarist because it's not legitimate. By the power invested in me by the American people through the American electoral process has zero meaning to a voluntarist. And
I agree.
It's not about being pragmatic. The fact is, Adam's plan, whether it deals with national parks or any of the other resources, and getting back to the wallet analogy here, amongst first being an illegitimate, he doesn't have that authority to do that, and majority consensus can't grant that authority. But second, it's forcing them who might not want to abide by that plan. And so does that mean everyone can just ignore it and not ask for permission in Homestead or try to enact their own plans? Or do they have to follow this new ruler and his friends, these custodians, and the nonprofits they personally choose to put into power? And I guess I would just yield my time here with a question for Adam, which is very basically, can the U.S. presidential electoral system grant legitimate authority to enact plans and practices which a nonviolent minority does not consent to?
No, and actually, I would say that if you have a legitimate property rights claim to something that you want to say the federal government has had custody of, that would be honored. I wouldn't have a problem with that. This is not going to be, forced on anybody. I really, and if you can help me in developing this plan, developing the platform to get into the details of it, to make sure that it is in line with the stolen wallet analogy, and to make sure that it isn't forced on anybody, that it isn't any of those things, then I'm open to those suggestions. I want the help of the community in developing this so that it is in line with the idea of, hey, the mugger put down the wallet. We're going to pick it up and do our best to return it to the rightful owner. So, I mean, like I said, I'm totally open to those suggestions. And, you know, how we word this, I agree, is important, you know, and I've said different things in different interviews where, you know, you might say you don't like that wording. That's fine. The core concept here is the same, that we are building the consensus among the American people to put down the guns of the federal government. And when they do, the federal government essentially has to drop the wallet. And I'm not saying that I have any authority. I'm just saying, like, I am going to pick up the wallet, and if no one stands in my way, I am going to, and no one says, I have a legitimate property claim to this, Adam, you can't take this piece of land, I'm going to say, okay, fine, take it. But this property here that the federal government just put down, that's been stolen from the American people, if no one stands in my way, if the American people want this and they withdraw their consent from the existing authority, this is what I'm going to do with it. This is how I'm going to return the stolen goods to the people whom they've been stolen from. So yeah, I mean, you can argue with the language, and you know, I don't have a problem with that. You know, I hope you understand that a big part of what we do in political activism is create a gateway for people. You know, you look at Ron Paul, the measure of him, his success was not that he, you know, got in the debates, or that he, you know, was elected to Congress so many times, or that he spoke on the floor of the House. It was really that he got people to read Rothbard, that he got people to change their lifestyles, that he got people to say, I'm not going to consent to the state, that I'm going to go galt. And I think that is fundamentally more important. One of the questions that I get sometimes is, what are you going to do about the Federal Reserve System? And I believe that the Federal Reserve System is not a private bank or a government bank. It is a public-private partnership. So how soon should the dollar be put out of use? The answer is, let the market decide. And all we're going to do is withdraw the coercive support of the federal government from the current banking system. And I have a feeling, and I'm really hoping that it's not even an issue by the time we win, because you know, for example, with myself, you know, I'm not perfectly crypto only. I mean, if you guys want to go casual, I don't care. I'll just finish the point then. I'm not perfectly crypto only. I use the dollar for the few things that I have to in engaging with, you know, with people who only accept dollars. But I do as much of my business in crypto as possible. I do barter, you know, and I pay people, you know, by bartering with cryptos for their labor rather than employing them on the record as much as I can. And if we get to the point, when we get to the point that 51+% of the American electorate says, yeah, we don't need a federal government anymore, we don't need a president at all, then I think we're going to have so many people using crypto by then that the dollar will already be gone. The real value of this campaign is not in, well, and then Adam is custodian and gets to do all these things. The value is Adam gets to use this platform to spread this message, to wake people up, to change the paradigm, to change how people act, so that by the time he wins, the federal government is already irrelevant. And I'm just going to pick up the mess, clean up the piece, you know, pick up the pieces and clean up the mess at that point.
Okay. All right. And Graham, do you have he went for about three and a half minutes to 4 minutes. So yeah, I mean, yeah, feel free to you know, rebut, ask another question or whatever,
Sure.
whatever you want to do.
Sure. So Adam just said, you know, my question, can the U.S. presidential system, electoral system, grant legitimate authority to enact plans over non-consenting, non-violent minorities? He said no, straight up. So if nobody has to abide by your plan with it, I think it would be, you know, kind of a waste of time as getting the message out. You know, you said Ron Paul. Yeah, I was a Ron Paul supporter. I went to rallies in Chicago. I was doing marches for Ron Paul. And a lot of people bring up this point to me. And I was a statist then as well. But yeah, it did help me along that path to going full on saying, you know what, screw all this stuff. I don't need any of it. I don't need a constitution or anything. But, you know, Ron Paul was consistent. He didn't claim that everything he was trying to do was in line with voluntarism or the voluntarist property ethic, which your plan by definition is not. And I've already proven that. I mean, if there's any point in the first part of my opening statement that was false, I hope it's pointed out to me. But it seems pretty straightforward to me. So, you know, if you have no authority, but then on Jeff Berwick's Anarchast, you said something different. You said just now I would have no authority. You said on his show, I would have the distribution of the property that is stolen. Well, that's an authority that has to be required via a legitimate, ground norm of ethics. Otherwise, the reason the principle is there is we could have anyone willy-nilly coming in and saying, well, I take control of this because I know what to do best with it, and no one else is doing anything, which is another ridiculous criticism. But it's kind of the point of principles. Principle means foundation. You can't just throw them out and then keep saying your plan is in line with this philosophy. Ron Paul woke a lot of people up. That's great. He may be a voluntarist. I personally think he is, but he never claimed that every little thing he was trying to do was, in line with voluntarism. And I want to stress again, elections can't grant the authority even to distribute property. And people say, oh, you're just being, it's not like that at all. Lots of what I see happening in the voluntarist circles is totally awesome right now and happening in a more vibrant way than ever. And it seems to me that a lot of people are scared of the risk, because there is a risk, even with a small level of disobedience. Adam knows about risk. Adam knows about the state coming after you. But you can't hide in politics. I mean, you can't hide in the mouth of the beast. And what I want to do to kind of, I know I have a little time left here, but I want to go to my next question. And I'm not trying to make a real personal dig here, but I think it's pertinent to the conversation. And the question I want to ask is, in light of recent confusion, and I feel still unsatisfactorily addressed concerns about your campaign's handling of bail donations, as well as some abusive $100 self-upvoting of vitriolic comments aimed at other Steamians. Why is anyone supposed to trust you to handle these resources? And aside from that, even if you are this super awesome, super perfect guy, why should you be able to force your plan on anyone? And if you're not forcing it on anyone, then who cares? We can all just disregard it. That's fine with me. But to ask someone to, you have to trust my plan because I have the majority consensus of the American people, again, meaningless terms to any individualist, seems very strange to me. So, I mean, if your plan's not going to be backed up by force, then aren't we all just free to ignore it?
Absolutely. Now, Graham, I've never received a compliment like that I'm some perfect guy, but I really appreciate that. So thanks.
No, I didn't say you're a perfect guy, but go on.
No, so if you want to accuse me of incrementalism, if you want to accuse me of a kind of compromise, sure. I don't think you shouldn't go out and not vote for marijuana legalization when you have the opportunity in your state, because it's not the end of the drug war, or it's not the end of the state entirely. So when you talk about my plan being forced on people, I really do take issue with that, because the only people it's being forced on are the ones who are illegally, unlawfully, unethically being the mafia that is the federal government itself. So if you want to say, I'm forcing the mugger to put down the wallet. Yeah, that's the only person that it's being forced on. I'm not going to stop you from going and homesteading federal lands. That's not part of the plan. If you want to go and homestead, in federal lands, and I would say aside from national parks, because they should be preserved as those discrete economic entities. I think that's what the market already is clearly showing a demand for, and that should be preserved. I'm not going to stop you. Like I said, if you have a legitimate property rights claim as an individual to a nuclear warhead, although I would say that you clearly don't, then I'm not going to stop you from exercising that individual property claim. If the federal government stole something from you and you can say clearly, hey, that was stolen from me, I am going to go take it back, I have no problem with that. So there is no non-consenting minority, as you call it, in this. Sure, and as for the trusting me part, I've made this perfectly clear. When the American people assert irrefutably through the electoral process that they're not going to put up with the federal government existing any longer, it's not going to matter who I am or what the plan is. It's simply going to be impossible to be president. It's going to be impossible for anyone to try to keep the institution going, because that consent is gone. So what I've said is that if on day one, they bring me the executive order to dissolve the federal government, that's, here's a stack of papers, Mr. Kokesh, go ahead and sign this. And I say, no. You know what? Forget that. I'm not trustworthy. I'm going to just double cross everybody here. Bring me the executive order to be dictator for life. Shoot me. Just shoot me. Now, in all seriousness, I hope that you don't have to shoot me if I've lost my mind so much as to try to do something so wrong and unethical as that. I hope you could lead me away in handcuffs. But yeah, you should absolutely use force to defend freedom. And if someone says, hey, I'm going to be president after the American public has said we're not going to have a president, then you should use force to take them out. So if you shoot me and someone comes up and says, well, I was his vice presidential nominee, so I'm going to come in and now I'm going to be president. No, shoot them too. That's the point of this campaign, is that it is the American people building consensus that no one is allowed to have this authority at all. And if that happens and the property is sitting there, I'm going to say, well, this is generally the will of the public. This is the best that we can create as a general market consensus to say that Adam can go in as a bankruptcy agent. We're going to have this plan. We're going to do this with the stolen property. This is the best consensus that we have. And this is, again, in free market terms. Uh-oh, they're coming for me. Just kidding. It's a fire truck, I think. But if we have this consensus, this is perfectly in line with the voluntarist property ethics and market ideals, because if you had, say, a corporation that everybody had a share interest in, then they would get to vote, at least based on how much has been stolen from them or what their stake is. And again, it's not going to be perfect, so we're going to have to do the best approximation we can in order to carry out something that gets us away from the existence of the federal government entirely, that you as a shareholder get to vote in what the bankruptcy plan is. You have a stake as an American citizen, and this is where it gets really imperfect. So you want to call me a compromiser, fine. There are people outside of the borders of the United States who have been screwed over far worse than the American people, the protected citizens of the empire. And they're not going to get compensated, but I think most of them are willing to say, well, hey, we're not going to have to worry about the American empire anymore. That's a good compromise. We'll support that. And yeah, it's, if you want to say that, that's where the real problem is. If you really want to put this into, and I think you missed the point on this, Graham. If you really want to put this into the voluntarist property ethics, you see that as a bankruptcy agent, everybody who has a stake in the corporation that is being dissolved should be able to vote for how the property is distributed upon that bankruptcy. Then yeah, we're using American citizenship as a bad proxy for having an ownership stake in the corporation of the federal government, when there are so many more victims all over the world. That's the real problem with this plan. So yeah, I'm an incrementalist, I'm a compromiser, and no plan is going to be perfectly in line with voluntarist property ethics that confronts the state. Even the free market ones. Even if you say, hey, we're going to all use Bitcoin. We're going to crash the dollar. We're going to take away the toys. We're going to make sure that no one ever enlists. No one goes and fights for, goes and kills for politicians. You're still going to have an imperfect distribution of all of the funds that have been stolen. So I think what I'm presenting is at least the closest practical way of applying voluntarist property ethic. And I think we have it as people who see this as the ideal, people who see that voluntarism is the truth. We have I don't want to say a responsibility or a duty, because those are silly, false obligations, but we have an opportunity to bring humanity closer to that. It's never going to be perfect. It's never going to be perfectly in line with the ideals, because the government has stolen so much from so many people and confused where it's gone and where it's come from, that, like I said, and this is what I mean by less materialistic. And I don't mean that to apply to you. You're an ideologue the same way as I am. But in terms of this idea of voluntarism says that people should have this property based on, it's never going to be perfect. And in light of the market seeking efficiency, we also have to compromise and look at what the most efficient plan is for achieving a voluntary society. Excuse me? Yeah, I'm sure I went over time, so take your time in a response, please.
Yep, go for it, Graham.
Okay, so this whole mischaracterization of what I and several others are saying as if we're searching for some sort of utopia, it really blows my mind every time, because that's not what anyone's talking about here. We're talking about the most practical thing there is, which is the free market. And the difference between the free market not exactly returning everything to the proper owner, I agree with Adam. It can never be done perfectly, and that's my whole point. The free market is the most fair arbiter there is. One man cannot, and one government cannot measure, cannot calculate prices, cannot measure supply and demand. Let me get back to the wallet metaphor. Actually, what Adam's doing, the appropriate metaphor would be coming houses full of wallets with no IDs in them, and then saying, hey, I have a plan to return them to everyone. Let's do it. Vote for me. Instead of letting the communities and the market of property owners from the ground up work it out from themselves. And this is the practical solution. Here in my community, this small little country neighborhood in Japan, we have a little community organization. Problems at this level are very easily dealt with. Then we can decide how we want to deal with the bigger level from there on out. And this doesn't happen from the top down, just because it's impossible to do that with a centralized, cumbersome and clunky political plan where the market is a fine-tuned instrument where, yeah, maybe things won't be perfect, but if it's done from the individual out and not from the mass down to the individual, it's going to be fair because it's based on principle and not just one person's plan. So no one's saying the result's ever going to be perfect. But voluntarism is the most practical, pessimistic, hard-nosed thing there is, because we realize human nature dictates that, there's legitimate ways to gain control of property and illegitimate ways. This way we don't have people becoming king. It doesn't matter how good or people say, you're going to do. So I appreciate that Adam has said he's an incrementalist because, yes, the plan, violates voluntarist principle. And I don't agree that it's okay to violate it a little bit for the greater good, because you say things like the American people and you say you would have the consent of everyone. How do you know? There's millions of people. Maybe some people don't want to, maybe some people want to do things in a different way. This whole metaphor of bankruptcy agent it doesn't hold, because with a bankruptcy agent, you contract for them with the service. My family hasn't contracted with Adam. I don't know anyone that's contracted with Adam. The goal is a noble one, on its face, to get rid of the federal government. But this idea that things are not happening and then it's not happening now, we can't. It's just a superficial, easy attack to make that lots of people, not just Adam, have made. But like I said, there's so much going on right now. There's such a robust community growing. You can imagine that you're going to change the state via the state. It's the largest crime syndicate in the world. It's not going to voluntarily put itself out of business through its own political mechanisms. That's just common sense. All the stuff that's going on right now, underground, agorism, and I agree with Adam that agorism is not perfect. But the stuff that's going on now, man, it's already happening. And I said 43% of people didn't even show up at the last election. So why are we going to try to herd everyone back in now and start to try to restore their faith in the process just for a second until we can take away their faith in the process? This doesn't make sense to me. The practical way forward is to start with your community, see what you can change in there, work together, then network with other communities, not through a centralized, clunky, top-down plan. And again, just to get back and labor the point some more, because I don't think it can be said enough, you can't assume authority even for a little bit via an electoral process. Adam has agreed and kind of disagreed. The ends don't justify the means. You just can't. You can. I mean, if that's what you want to do, just don't call it voluntarism, because that's by definition inaccurate and false.
So, I fundamentally disagree. I see that the voluntarist property ethic is still consistent in a bankruptcy proceeding in a custodial plan. And when you say that it's being forced on people who do not consent, that's not true, because there's no one who has a specific individual property rights claim that's going to be denied. I mean, you can say, I don't consent to Adam de-weaponizing nuclear weapons and selling foreign military bases. I don't consent to Adam ending the drug war. Well, you don't get a right to say you don't consent to me doing something that I have a right to do as an individual. You don't say, well, I don't consent to Adam smoking pot tonight, so he can't smoke pot. No, you don't have the right, once people have said we're not going to do this, to say, well, we're going to maintain a system that is unethical. I think inadvertently here, you are defending the system of government and saying that if people don't consent, then they don't, then that system has to be allowed to continue. So when I see this, and again, looking at the pain and suffering, I'm all for community buildup. I'm all for that. The problem is, you cannot end the violence of the state with agorism unless you have 90+% of the population on board. Because if even 10% of the population believes in statism and the rest of us are just, going galt, they're still going to be able to hire men with guns to point them at you and control you and steal from you. I'm not willing to let that continue. I'm not willing to let the drug war continue another day. I'm not willing to let the war on terror continue another day. I'm not willing to allow the existence of the U.S. military and the CIA and the FBI and the IRS continue for another day. And none of those things address that. Yes, we can get to a critical mass. Yes, we can withdraw our consent. Yes, if enough of us go galt, eventually the system will collapse. What I'm saying is, let's avoid the collapse. Let's have a peaceful, orderly transition instead. So, yeah, it's not going to be fair. As you say, agorism isn't fair, voluntarism isn't fair. Sure, I'm not saying this is going to be perfect either. This is going to be more fair. This is going to be a lot more equitable redistribution based on broad-based public ownership. And in terms of faith, no, I'm not telling people to put faith in elections or put faith in government. I'm telling people the exact opposite. This is the last, if we can do this before the system collapses, this is going to be the last federal election you ever have to vote in. And the cool thing about this is it sets off a domino effect. People all over the world are going to be looking at their central governments going, do we really need you? And the answer is, heck no, you don't. You can do the same thing all over the world. You can get government down to the community level. And it's only going to be possible. And I think it's already possible. A lot of libertarians and people like taking your perspective are quick to say, we have to build from the ground up. We have to change the paradigm. We have to get community involved. And I agree. And I think it's done. I think we've got, not like it's complete, but I think we've gotten to enough of a critical mass that we can apply this to the political process and say, hey, let's withdraw our consent now. We don't need government. Because I go out, I talk to average Americans, and in the age of the internet, you can say, look, is there anything that the federal government does better than the state government other than murder and kill and steal from people? And they go, no, I guess we don't need it. Yeah, because people have done the work already, because activists like you have spread the message enough and have done the work and have shown with cryptocurrency, with the efforts to provide relief to people in Venezuela that you cited, all these things. We don't need government for that. So let's withdraw our consent in a way that allows us to say the guns, the big guns of government can't be pointed at anyone any longer.
Okay. All right. So Graham, did you want? I guess haven't really had I know Graham asked a couple questions, but I guess Adam, do you have any questions that you'd like to ask Graham?
Well, I mean, since he went to the personal route, if he doesn't mind, I'd like to ask a couple questions about his post about me.
I did connect it to the resolution, but yeah, feel free. Go ahead.
Well, and I'll try to connect this to the resolution.
You didn't really address that either, but that's okay.
Oh no, I did. I addressed the trust issue, that you don't have to trust me, that you can shoot me. You can shoot me. But,
okay, so we can just ignore everything then. That's okay.
Yeah, totally.
Great.
Yeah,
great.
That's that's the part of the campaign message you should love, is that I'm telling people, no, you can disagree, you can dissent, you can totally refuse, you can be disobedient, you can claim all of your own legitimate property, and at the point at which
permission, without asking permission from your custodians.
Yes, if you have a legitimate property rights claim to anything, we will not stand in the way. The custodial authority of the federal government will not stand in your way. That is absolutely an essential part of this platform.
But it already is, though, standing in the way by you having the illegitimate authority to reallocate these things to private businesses of nonprofits of your choice. Like I said, you can't gain that authority through an election. But if you want to ask a personal question, I hope you will about my post. I would love personal,
it. But a lot of the stuff that you criticized me for in your post were about things that were inconclusive at best, and things that you said that were based on, well, I heard this, well, I saw this, not I have evidence or I have proof. But you even went so far. What was it you said about my arrest in Texas? Oh, you said that this couldn't be because of this one little blog post on Steemit that got 1,000 views or something, right? Well, I mean, right away, that's inherently dishonest intellectually, because we put out a press release, we had news coverage, we had an email blast that went out, we had the announcement on Facebook and on Twitter, and it went out to millions of people that way. And you said, oh, well, the federal government wouldn't come after Adam for a little blog post that got 1,000 views. So my question is, why are you so quick to take the side of government against someone who's trying to challenge government power when you don't have you don't have the evidence to do that? And you're saying, well, let's give the government the benefit of the doubt and say that Adam's being dishonest, when you really have no reason to do that except to troll me to get me to do a debate with you. And you know that I take all comers. I'm open to anything. You send me an email. I don't care if you want to troll me in real life. You could have spent this entire hour on personal attacks on me, and I would sit here and laugh at it. You know, why do you have to do that? I mean, it's almost like you're doing with me what I did with Larkin. You brought up the $100 upvote. I changed it. I just wanted to be on the top of the pile and get his attention because he's slandering me. So, you know, if that's what your goal is, then that's fine. But I think you should be open about it.
Well, I mean, the first point you raised is an entirely fair point. I did not know you issued a press release, and I stand corrected on that.
See, that's the thing. Before you would attack someone, you would do your research.
Let me finish. But the other points in that article stand. And no, I was not. I explicitly stated I was not taking the side of the government. There were questionable things about how things were worded. You know, it was said on some of the videos that the charges were not known. Well, everyone on the internet knew the charges against you. You know, things like that are questionable.
No,
the main point of that article, though, was where did those donations go? Why was no one given a clear answer? I mean, your chief strat said, hey, we raised all this money for getting Adam's bail, but we paid zero bail. And, you know, hey, but all the donations were received under the explicit, you know, I've got all the different links to the fundraiser, get Adam out of jail. So I just asked, where did that go? You know, and I'm raising questions. I think it's important to raise. And as far as being a troll, I don't see myself as a troll. You know, that's what's funny. The first time, I'm about to finish here. The first time I pointed out something I saw as an inconsistency in your plan, you said, I'm an annoying and ignorant troll. For me, that's a big red flag. So as far as your point about the announcement, I stand corrected. As far as the other points, yes, they stand.
Okay, so you were annoying me. And when it comes to the research, as you just admitted you didn't do, you were ignorant.
I didn't do research.
I'm pretty sure that you weren't trolling me. What?
On one point, I was mistaken.
Okay, but that's the thing, is like, why not do the research first? And even with the donations, you could have done the research there before attacking me on it, because we made it clear that these weren't donations that were raised explicitly for that they were just money that we had raised through Steemit from people upvoting my post. And that was explicitly in what I said from jail. And other people really spun that and misrepresented it as if they didn't know what Steemit was. For the donations that were specifically received for bail, we checked with everyone and no one had a problem with us using the funds for something else. So again, like, you're looking for excuses to attack me and showing that you're willing to attack me when you haven't done the research, and you're wrong. And as for the thing about the charges, we didn't say that nobody knew the charges. We said that they hadn't been formally presented, which was true. And they hadn't been presented to me. I sat in jail for 10 days, and every single day I said, I told someone in that jail, I am constitutionally entitled to know the charges that are being leveled against me. And not once did I get an actual piece of paper that said, these are the charges, this is why you're being held. And as of today, you can see what they used as the preliminary charges online in order to hold me, which they still didn't even present to me. And the way it works in Texas for anything drug related, they don't actually formally file charges until things have gone through the lab and come back. So no, as of yet, I have not been formally charged with anything still in Texas. And again, you know, you take the government side without doing the research. Graham, I mean, I think you're a great voice. I want you to step up and do, you know, and embrace at least the spirit that I have in my activism of, you know, when it's the government versus an activist, let's give the activist the benefit of the doubt and at least do our homework before we attack them. But more importantly, let's support everybody. Let's lift everybody up. If you don't like what I'm doing, fine. fine. Ignore me. Don't support me. I don't have a problem with that. But if you have the energy to put forward to spreading the message, why would you direct that to attack someone who's spreading, at least fundamentally, the exact same message?
Because you're not spreading the exact same message. And as far as that post goes, you know, prior to that, you know, I raised points about your campaign, and like I said, I was called a troll. So first of all, that raises some red flags. When I looked into the sensation and hype around donate, get Adam out of jail, which these donations happen often. I mean, you go to jail often, and it said, Adam,
well, what's often? Once a year?
Anarchist title, kidnapped by the state. Can I finish though? You know, to me, there were several other reasons, like logical reasons that I said. I didn't say this is why I'm on the government side. I said it could have been any one of these things. You admitted to driving erratically. You were speeding in Texas, where we all know the fucking cops are goons. You had drugs in the car, which you said were legal sacraments, but you used language, no contraband, no contraband. I understand you have to, maybe for legal reasons. All these donations, though, even on Steam, at the link said, let's get Adam out of jail. And then Ben Farmer comes out and releases a confusing video. And, you know, and then you say bail was zero. And I, you know, you're correct. I should have done more research in that regard, but that doesn't make every point I raised in the article valid. Like, let's look into this guy. I agree with you. I should have just emailed you and said, hey, what the fuck is going on here, man? Like, let me know. I'm interested. But after being called an annoying and ignorant troll, I wasn't so ready to do that. That said, I think the arguments that have been made so far about the principle, this is like our personal beef. Yeah, and you have some valid points about the announcement. Well, I rescind that. You know, I can go edit the post today and say, you know what, the announcement was bigger than that. To me, in my opinion, it was still hype. There's no way to prove that the deep state wanted you. You've been talking about your run for president since 2013. You filed the paperwork 3 days before. Yes, maybe. It just smelled a little bit like, hey, let's, you know, sensationalize to me. And I wanted to raise that point. As for the inaccurate point about the announcement, yes, I stand corrected on that. I know you've got, you know, time commitments tonight. Are we going to do opening statements? You want to respond to what I've just said here, or how you want to do this? What do you think, guys?
Well, was that an apology? Was there an apology in there for attacking without doing the research first? I wasn't sure.
Oh, yeah, I'll apologize on that one point. You're right.
All right. Well, thank you, brother. And I got to say, troll is not necessarily an insult. I think trolling is an essential part of communication on the internet. And if anything, hey, I think I trolled you.
Wait. Ignorant, annoying troll is ignorant and annoying. After I just pointed out, I didn't make any personal attack. I said, this is not a voluntarious plan. And that's the response I get. Come on, man.
Yeah. Well, hey, I think I trolled you bigger than you trolled me, because you're the one who set this debate up. I want every chance I have to spread this message and reach more people and wake people up to voluntarism and the value and virtue of participating in the political process, if nothing else, as a platform that the state has made relevant that we can use to reach more people and wake people up. So I want to thank you for making this possible. Thank you for setting this up. Thank you for being willing to concede and have that intellectual integrity. And, you know, I appreciate all the coverage that you've given me. It's been awesome. So thank you for all of that, Graham.
Are we going to do closing statements or what?
Yeah, we can move forward to closing statements.
I'll respond to what Adam said. Yes, that's very I'm not doing this to give. If your campaign's being promoted by it, fine. I'm glad you stepped up to the plate, because as I've seen this debate today, I've presented a logically irrefutable claim that the plan isn't voluntarist. You've admitted it's incrementalist and not in line with voluntarist principle. We just have to trust you for a little bit, and then, you know, we're going to go on to this whole thing. So for me, yeah, you know, if you want to use that kind of little thing, well, I'll say, you know, thank you for exposing that this actually isn't in line with, you know, hard, you know, commonly understood libertarian property ethic.
Well, hey, if you think that, well, incrementalism doesn't necessarily mean it's not voluntarist. If there are two people pointing guns at you and you get one of them to put down the gun, that's not an endorsement of the other person holding the gun at you. So I think I've made my position clear. I think that if what I'm proposing is not perfectly in line with what I'm suggesting and being in line with voluntarist property ethics based on the concept of a bankruptcy agent, based on every shareholder, you know, voting based on their stake, you know, then, you know, fine. criticize me for that. The foundation of it, for me, the primary motivator is voluntarism. I am a voluntarist. I believe that all human relations should be voluntary, should be free of force, fraud, and coercion. I believe that this is the most important message that we can get before the world today to stop the pain and the suffering of statism. And I'm not willing to wait. I'm willing to compromise and say, all right, you can keep that one tiny gun pointed at people. I'm going to get to that next. We're going to get to that one next. That one's just as wrong, but we need to get the good, the big guns away from people. We need to end the major suffering associated with statism. I'm not willing to wait for the building of the perfect market from the ground up when there's clear consensus already. The market has spoken. We have 85+% of the American people in favor of marijuana legalization, and it's still illegal at the federal level. This is insane. The work has been done. Let's collect on it. Let's end this big statist entity, and let's bring people one giant step closer to voluntarism that's going to have so much momentum that we're going to get to that utopia relatively quickly within a matter of decades. This is not just the most efficient way to spread this message, it's the most effective because it's the one that results in the most immediate reduction of coercion in the world. And if you're a voluntarist, not just because you believe in the ideal, but because you believe that coercion is wrong, that it's bad for people, that it causes suffering, then I think it's incumbent upon us to take this opportunity to reduce the coercion in the world as best we possibly can. And Graham, I'm never going to stand in the way of anything that you're doing that's voluntary. And by the way, you know that everything I'm doing is fundamentally voluntary. I'm not pointing guns at peaceful people. I'm not making illegitimate claims to individual private property that's been legitimately acquired. I'm using my words. I'm talking. I'm getting the message out. And I hope as long as it stays in that realm and I'm not advocating violence against anybody, that you would at least have the respect to support that by staying out of the way, as I would for all of your activism that is in line with the same principles.
Okay, that sounded like a closing statement. Was that Adam?
That's it for me, and I'll just sign off with one thank you. But if Graham wants to make one final rebuttal closer, hey, I'll sit here and listen.
I definitely want to make a closing statement. I think that's part of the agreement. So I'm not willing to compromise on the rights of the smallest minority, which is the individual. That's why I'm a voluntarist. This doesn't mean that I'm waiting for utopia. We don't believe in utopia. That's why we're voluntarists. We know that one man can't centrally legislate freedom. This is a market nation that those of us who disagree with political authority, even temporary political authority, are somehow sitting on our hands or don't care about ending the drug war or don't care about ending the state. We're already, half of us are broke using our resources to try to end it. Don't view authority granted by elections as legitimate, because there's no way to get the consent of every person that this legislation is going to affect. If we can ignore it, if I can do whatever I want, if everyone can homestead all the lands and not keep them open to the public, because hey, it's no one's gone out there and homesteaded, it's open. That's great. If communities decide how they want to divvy it up locally, that's great, as long as it's voluntary. But it's not voluntary if it's done centrally through an elected leader who's going to put the legislation out there. And this is why I've taken issue with the message from the beginning. I appreciate you correcting me on some of my assumptions, but none of these assumptions have to do with the core root issue, which that there is no legitimacy to the authority that's supposedly granted, which you yourself have said you'll have and you both won't have. And so what I'm saying is this isn't about utopianism at all. It's about being realistic. It has to come from the ground up because it's an individualist philosophy. And I think the best way to stop this violence is to stop participating in, and you've made the claim that it doesn't legitimize the state. And I've never said that voting is violence, full stop. But what we're saying when we say it legitimizes the presidential electoral process is not that we view it as legitimate. That's a clever twist of words. See, we know it's not illegitimate. No, but it sure is using backed by force, to try to gain this consent of the American people. The American people is a meaningless term, even if you have a majority. any plan that by design, potentiates the violation of by design, potentiates the violation of someone's individual self-ownership is simply not legitimate. So it's not a purist thing, but it is pretty black and white as far as voluntarism is concerned. And all I wanted to say is this plan is not a voluntarist one, and we're not sitting on our hands. We're busting our ass. And that's why I take issue with what is being done now to make the political system look like there's still some hope there, when finally it seems people are finally losing hope and doing their own thing more than ever and building this from the ground up. So my final statement is, this is not about a utopia, but I'm not going to drop the label anarchist in order to reach more people. I'm not going to put the ideology sex. What got you here in the first place? The idea that it's never okay to violate even one person by design, and that's where the market comes in as our true leader. People are afraid of violence, but you're not going to hide from violence from the state in the mouth of the state. It's a false blanket of security. There is risk to standing for freedom. There is risk to whatever level of disobedience you choose, and that's the beauty of voluntarism. Everyone can choose. Some people may not pay taxes. Some people with a family may choose to, navigate that risk-benefit analysis a little differently because they've got people that depend on them. Some people do activism, The market supports and integrates all of these things flawlessly when they're voluntary. This can't be done through a top-down system. Anything that's being done to bring about a voluntary society is fine with me, but the ends never justify the means. So I can't leave the principle foundation. Principle just means foundation. I'll anticipate in politics for a little bit and then jump back real quick. I don't think that's legitimate. And I'm encouraging people to be more active than ever. So it's not about sitting on our hands. It's just about saying, let's keep going to decentralize things and not rush back to this violent platform that has 260 million corpses behind it in the last 100 years alone.
All right, and I did just see that we had one question in chat for you, Adam. Do you have? I think it'll be a quick question. Do you have another minute here, Adam?
Sure, let's do it and then wrap it up. Thanks, guys.
Yep. So Jim asks, serious question: how can I shoot Adam if he has the ring? Secret Service won't acknowledge a stand-down order against assassinations. So yeah.
Well, I'm going to make it part of my platform that there will be and you know what? That's a really good question. I would hope that if that happens, there maybe not at that exact point when I'm in the Oval Office will you be able to shoot me, but you'll find a way to shoot me. It's not hard to kill somebody. So if I walk out of the White House and I didn't sign the executive order, then find a way. Seriously, find a way.
Well, maybe an assassination market could open up on a blockchain. So I guess there may be some solutions.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, awesome. Well, thank you, Adam. Thank you, Graham. And
Thanks,
I'll say the same thing that Graham did. I appreciate you guys having the courage of your convictions to defend your stances in a very public format. Definitely takes guts, and I know that I appreciate it. I'm sure the listeners do too. Do you guys want to plug anything before I close this out? Website, Steemit accounts, anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, if you have any questions about anything I've said today or want to see the documents, whatever, backing up my argument, contact me on Steam chat. I'm Anarchy, KFKANARCHY84. Get at me and let me know what you think. I'd appreciate it. I've also got a YouTube channel. If you search Voluntary Japan, it'll pop up for you there.
Great.
Yeah,
Adam.
the book that I wrote, that I started when I was in jail in DC in a government-induced, taxpayer-funded spiritual retreat, is Freedom. It's the ultimate voluntarism red pill, and it's available for free in every digital format, including audiobook, at my main website, thefreedomline.com. And if you want to contact me, Adam at thefreedomline.com. I love doing debates like this. Graham, thank you for making this happen. Shane, thank you for moderating. You've done a great job. And if anybody else wants to do this, I'll throw down every week. So I'll throw down every day. I mean, I'm doing 2 or 3 interviews a day now, and I love it. I love getting the message out. And most people, it's more challenging statists about voluntarism and whether or not we should have a government at all, and whether or not we should have a president. But if it's about the core of how we achieve a voluntary society, I think that's an important conversation also.
I agree. So as soon as I close out this live stream, I will be putting together a post on Steemit with the archive link. If you go to steemit.com/@ShaneRadliff, and upvote, resteam, all that jazz, I'd certainly appreciate it. And for YouTube, hit that subscribe button, upvote this video, and share it around. Get this out there because again, I do think this is a very important discussion to be had. So thanks so much, guys. Adam, Graham, for the listeners, thank you guys for joining us.
Thanks,
and
Shane.
seriously hope you found this discussion as valuable as I did. Laissez-faire.